So we get two new versions of the Hulk in Philip Kennedy Johnson's Infernal Hulk. One of them we get right off the bat. The other one we get at the end, but I don't think the second one is what we think it is. So this first Hulk is provided to us when basically he asked Bruce Banner and Dr. Voodoo Jericho Drumm where they learned about a riddle game, because the two of them are literally in a hellish landscape, which is where this Hulk is at, and they're in the process of literally being crucified. So first question, what is going on here, Rob? Make it make sense. Okay, so this is taking place in issue number 10. This comes, of course, as you would expect, in the aftermath of issue number 9, and then it piggybacks off of the Incredible Hulk, volume 3, which was called Soul Cages. Literally, it's Philip Kennedy Johnson's Incredible Hulk, which goes into Infernal Hulk, which is where we're at now. In the Soul Cages storyline, before all the events of Infernal Hulk kicked off, there was a point where Bruce Banner, the Incredible Hulk, they basically had a sidekick named Charlie. Now, Charlie got herself caught up in all kinds of crazy demonic stuff, and so what ended up happening is that Bruce Banner and the Hulk had to travel to the Strange Academy to meet with Jericho Drumm in order to find a way to a demonic realm in order to save Charlie. This was a place called the Soul Cages. The way it was established was that while there are all kinds of demons and monsters and so on in Marvel, not everyone can be destroyed. Instead, some of those individuals are too powerful to be destroyed, and in that instance, they can only be caged. And so Jericho Drumm told Hulk and Banner, the first step on your journey is to go find the Flesh Weaver, a guy named Suman Guru, and that's exactly what they did. What the Flesh Weaver does is he actually uses a combination of the blood of individuals and their unspent years, assuming they died early, in order to essentially take their bodies, right, and just possess them, or at least create clones of them, more or less. And so when they get there, the Flesh Weaver is flabbergasted by how strong the Hulk is, and is obsessed with possessing the Hulk, which clearly is not going to happen. The Hulk's never going to allow that to happen. And so instead, the Flesh Weaver slashes at the Hulk and steals his blood. And when that happens, the Flesh Weaver essentially clones the Hulk. That takes us into issue number 9, because as part of the entire Infernal Hulk run, because the Flesh Weaver has a clone, the real Incredible Hulk was still running around out there, right, with Banner. As part of Infernal Hulk and the lead up to it, the Eldest, a very powerful demon, split Banner and the Hulk apart and then possessed the Hulk's body. And that's what's happening right now in the Infernal Hulk story. Bruce Banner, realizing that Infernal Hulk was just destroying the Avengers, surviving nuclear blast, there was basically no way to defeat him, realized that he's the only one who can. But to do that, he has to get his Hulk body back, right? He has to basically regain his powers. And so that's what took place in issue number 9, that it led to Bruce Banner meeting with Jericho Drumm again, and then getting Jericho Drumm's help to go back to the Soul Cages to confront Suman Guru, and realizing that because Suman Guru had basically taken the blood of Banner, now he has a body of the Hulk. And that's what leads us here, because what ended up happening is they challenged him to Neferib's riddle game. And so that's where we get this bit of an explanation here, right, where it says, I thought sorcerers were the proudest, vainest of people, but I now bow to you, Bruce Banner, as the most arrogant living man. Do you know what Neferib's riddle game is? Neferib was a powerful sorcerer of Egypt. Centuries ago, a poor magician named Wahib came to Neferib demanding a magical jewel that he claimed Neferib had stolen. Neferib agreed to return the jewel if Wahib could best him in a game of simple riddles. But Neferib's riddles were woven in the language of magic, spellcraft, masquerading as a game. He subjected Wahib to the most horrifying torment, leaving him quite insane, and no one came for Neferib's jewel again. For centuries, Wahib's example has reminded sorcerers of the pitfalls of pride, but every generation or two, another proud young mage tries their hand at the riddle game, though only ever the most arrogant of men. And so that's where the question's asked by Suman Guru in his Hulk form. Did you read of the riddle game in some ancient book or other, a whispered rumor from a mad old scholar? How clever you must have felt to have learned of such a secret ancient thing. No doubt you thought, such a clever man as I must surely survive where so many learned men have died screaming. So, Bruce, shall we begin? Now, this is one of the cool things that Philip Kennedy Johnson's doing. Some might argue his Incredible Hulk run has long since worn out its welcome, but I think moments like this kind of remind us that it hasn't. That when it comes to the magical side of Marvel Comics, when you're talking about Midnight Suns and Doctor Strange and Jericho Drum and Ghost Rider and all that kind of stuff, that whole demonic side is a whole different world, and the rules are ever changing. If there's any consistent rule that's been established there, whether it was writers like Jason Aaron or guys like Doug Mink or whatever the case is, it's that the rules of this side change all the time, and we're always being introduced to new things. Even if you go back to the old Excalibur stories and you learn about the history of Merlin and all those guys, yeah, like the rules shift and change and whatnot. And that's one of the cool things here is we're kind of invoking this side of Marvel that we don't necessarily get to see. It's why Philip Kennedy Johnson said that Hellboy was a huge inspiration for his work on the Incredible Hulk. But that's where Suman Gru asks Bruce Banner, right? He says, "Your first riddle, little Banner, let us see if your arrogance is earned. In sun I hide, in dark return unto my honored fires are burned. The wealthy man fears not my call. The poor man dreads me most of all. Who am I?" And Bruce Banner figures it out like that. He's like, "You are winter," and like immediately calls it, right? And so the riddle continues on. But notice this, right? As this happens, magic begins to emanate the place, almost as if a spell is being cast here. Not only that, you actually see Bruce Banner and Jericho Drum being systematically tormented over this, almost as if it's some measure of a distraction, right? To throw them off kilter, to screw with their minds. But the riddle continues on nonetheless. Unknowable as mortal death, unfathomable as starry sky, within my flesh more treasures than in any gilded age gone by. The greenest grove, the fruitful womb, the deepest grave and blackest tomb. Of living things my blood is filled, and of the dead I am fuller still. And what's the answer to the riddle? The sea. And that again continues it on. With gifts of love, I hunt my prey, each one with hidden price to pay. I hide within thy treasures, dear. I watch and wait and linger near. On brightest day, my gifts I will take. With cruelest knife, thy heart I'll break. Beware thy loved one's warm embrace. For when I kill, I wear her face. Who am I? And the response of Banner? Grief. And that's the crazy thing here, is because while all of this is happening, and while Banner's being tormented, literally being drug around by demons, while he's chained up, the whole 9 yards, what does he do, right? He cuts his own stomach. He literally draws his own blood. And that's an important distinction to understand here, right? Because as that happens, and once it's all said and done, Banner's just kind of sitting there, right? Blood drawn, he's filled with arrows, the whole 9 yards, right? This guy has quite literally just been tormented in every conceivable way. Because that was the thing about Suman Gru, is what was established in the Soul Cage's story. It's what's being established here. It's not enough to simply just take the bodies or the forms of individuals. There is a kind of satisfaction that comes with tormenting people, tormenting their souls, their physical forms, the whole 9 yards. He's very Mephisto-esque, right, within Marvel. And that is something to be aware of, because I think that when people are fairly new to Marvel Comics, or when they only read the most broad stories that exist out there, right, Moon Knight, Midnight Suns, Doctor Strange, right, maybe some Doctor Doom, Doctor Strange, Triumph and Torment, right, whatever that case is, that people are kind of aware of these demonic beings on the surface. But there's all kinds of guys like Satanish and different things like that. You have these guys out here who are these demonic entities that love to torment individuals, right? They love to do it for their own personal satisfaction. This guy, Suman Gru, is just another one that's been recently introduced and was created by Philip Kennedy Johnson, but introduced nonetheless. And so that's where Bruce Banner, just sitting here in this tormented form, Suman Gru walks up on him and says, "You've done well, Banner. Indeed, you are passing clever, though not clever enough to see your foolishness in coming here. The riddle game goes on as long as the patron wishes. I will never give up this form, not for any reason. Your gift of Jericho Drum, I will gladly accept, and I will torture for 1,000 lifetimes. I hope you are as grateful for my gift to you, a swift death. Now, that was the bargain that was made, right? When Banner showed back up here, originally with Jericho Drum, he was met right off the bat in issue number 9 by Simon Guru, like almost immediately. And Banner was not welcome here, right? But Simon Guru kind of took it as a gift. Oh, so you've returned so that I may torment you and torture you, and you've brought a sorcerer with you, right? And that's where Bruce Banner challenged him to the riddle game in the first place, which is how all this starts, right? But the kind of wager that was made here was that if Banner wins, he gets the Hulk body. Right, this is what he gets from Suman Guru. If he loses, then Suman Guru gets to have Jericho Drum, which possessing the body of a powerful mage like Drum, that's incredible. That's no small feat, because one of the things to keep in mind, and this may be a bit of a controversial statement here, because history may kind of fly in the face of it, but I think reading between the lines, this is essentially true, that an individual sorcerer's ability to wield various magical spells isn't really based on how much they know. It is in part based on that, but it's also based on what magical abilities are being granted to them by the people who possess magical power. So for example, Doctor Strange derives something I think like 70% of his magical abilities from the Vishanti, right? Which is the reason why when he chose not to join the war with the Vishanti, he ended up losing a brunt of his magical abilities. That actually took place in Doctor Strange Sorcerer Supreme, issue number 80, if you're interested in looking it up. It was from Warren Ellis and Mark Buckingham. It was technically a story called The War of the Seven Spheres, and there's certainly more to it than what we describe here, but that's the bigger point. But the other part of this is, again, while it is limited to the amount of power that's being granted to a individual sorcerer by the powers that he's drawing on, the Vishanti or Siddharth or Mamu or whatever, it's also based on their level of knowledge, which means if you're someone like Suman Guru, who has all kinds of knowledge of magical spells, which is usually the case when you're talking about these demonic beings, they oftentimes know types of magic that traditional sorcerers on Earth don't know, because there's a kind of dark magic, black magic, that traditional sorcerers don't necessarily mess with because it can be so dangerous. Then suddenly that becomes your armory, right? That becomes your base of spells. You combine that knowledge with the existing knowledge of a sorcerer, and you can become immensely powerful. And so that's the idea of the gift that Suman Guru would get here. Torturing Dr. Voodoo for 1,000 lifetimes, and then ultimately taking his body and doing whatever he wants to do with it, casting spells, probably trying to invade Earth, who knows for sure. But the point is, when he goes to hit Bruce Banner with this sword, Banner stops it with his bare hands. And that's where Suman Guru is like, impossible, right? Like, what treachery is this? Like, you should not be able to stop this sword. And Jericho Drum frees himself, basically casts aside the illusion and says, you are slow to learn, Suman Guru, you underestimated me the last time we met. And then Banner pipes up and he says, you asked me one question that I have not answered yet, Suman Guru. You asked where I learned about Neferib's riddle game. And he says, it was Dr. Voodoo who told me. And that's when you switch over to the meeting between the two. Now, this is one of the coolest aspects of Drum's character. And honestly, I wish he would get more of a presence in Marvel Comics. Admittedly, Doctor Strange has been the Sorcerer Supreme for a long time until he's not, right? Currently, Wanda is the Sorcerer Supreme, but I kind of wish that Jericho Drum would be more than a character who's just kind of like confined to background stories in Marvel. They would bring him like more to the forefront and keep him there for a prolonged period of time. But when he's meeting with Banner, right, he tells him, if you're right, that Suman Guru has a Hulk form, he will never give it up. And who would, right? Who would willingly give up the power of the Incredible Hulk? Limitless strength? Forever? Yeah, like, I mean, that's just something you don't walk away from. And so Drum tells Banner, we could offer Suman Guru his freedom for the Hulk form, but he knows that I would betray him, which is true, right? I mean, if Jericho Drum rolled in here and said, hey man, if you give us the Hulk form, we will give you your freedom. We will unleash you back out onto the world. That's a terrible idea, because the amount of havoc that he would unleash on Earth, no, not even the Hulk form is worth taking that risk, because admittedly, he could be even more of a credible threat for someone like the Eldest, or even team up with Eldest. So now you've got two demonic entities running around, one of whom has enough power to seemingly rival the one above all, right? That kind of seems to be the case when it comes to the Eldest's current level of power in Marvel. Quite literally, right? In the Infernal Hulk run, the Eldest fought an avatar of the one above all and easily overpowered it with no effort whatsoever, right? I mean, that's kind of what we're talking about here. It's nuts what's been going on with this story. And so that's where Drum continues on and says there's nothing else that he would give up that power for except maybe you could propose Neferib's riddle game. And Banner asks, right, what is this? Like, what's the whole idea behind this riddle game? And that's where Drum tells him, a barbaric gamble between sorcerers. The riddles are sadistic conjuring spells meant to maim and kill a rival. It would be a terrible risk. The riddle game is almost never invoked because there's no incentive for the patron not to cheat. Death or insanity are nearly certain. And so Bruce asked the question, right? And so you're suggesting we do this, right? How would we win? And that's where Drum says, by cheating him as he is cheating us, because he will. Right, he's going to. I mean, sure, the nature of the riddle game is that he could just stretch it out forever, and it just keeps going on and on and on and on and on. And there's no way, right, that Banner's going to be able to overcome it. But keep in mind, the nature of Suman Guru is to torture and torment and eventually destroy the very people like Banner who stumble in to his soul cage. Right? And so that's why cheating him is the only real option. Jericho Drum says, I know Suman Guru. He revels in torture. He would take great time with us. That is how we win. We will trust in the arrogance of sorcerers. And so that's when you switch back to what's happening in the here and now. And that's where Drum, standing over Suman Guru, right? Suman Guru asks, what have you done? And Drum tells him, when we fought, I marked you with a beggar's rune. Before we came here, I gave Banner a rune of his own, but the runes needed time to do their work. As you tortured us, the runes have been slowly leaching Hulk's stolen essence back into its owner. Invoking the riddle game was a risk, of course, but you always love to take your time with your victims' deaths. And so that's where Banner pops up and he says, now I have a riddle for you. And as he's saying this, he's transforming into his new Hulk form, which is gray. But again, while we might say this is clearly Joe Fixit, I don't think it is, and I'll explain why here in a second. But as he continues to transform, he continues on, right? You know, I now have a riddle for you. What is the greatest killer of man? And Suman Guru starts freaking out, right? He's like, what? What are you talking about, right? And that's where Drum says, that is your true riddle beneath all the others. Yes, winter, the sea, grief, war, pestilence, ambition, all the things that torment and kill us. Which is greatest? And that's where Banner says, answer the riddle. And so the response of Suman Guru, only my magic holds this form together. In the world above, it will fade away, and you will be mortal again in weeks or perhaps only days. So now we have a ticking clock. That's what PKJ has given us, right? He's basically told us this form is temporary. It's only going to last for so long. But Banner doesn't want to hear it, right? He smashes the ground again and just says, answer. And the response of Suman Guru, himself. The greatest killer of man is himself. And Banner just says, yes, and like clocks this guy and knocks him unconscious. But that's where Jericho Drum chimes in and says, I'm sorry, Banner, Suman Guru is right. The rune did not have time to complete the spell fully. That body is temporary. And so Banner, of course, says, you know, then I'll make the most out of it. But here's the kicker. Right? On the surface, this looks like Joe Fixit, or maybe even looks like the original Grey Hulk, but I don't know that that's true. And here's the reason why I say that. Right? So in addition to all of this, right, with everything going on, thinking back to everything that has happened in Infernal Hulk, one of the things that we learned is that while the Eldest does have the Hulk's physical body in the real world, because this is all taking place in a demonic space, while the Eldest has the body of the Hulk in the real world, all the other iterations of the Hulk exist in the Hulk's mindscape. Right? That's one of the things that we learned inside that place. So within that mind space is Worldbreaker Hulk and Savage Hulk and, you know, Joe Fixit Hulk and all those guys. So Joe Fixit is still there, right? Joe Fixit is still present within the Hulk's mindscape. He's not being channeled here. At the same time, where we could make an argument in saying this is the original Gray Hulk from when his character was originally published in Marvel Comics, right? That basically had to change the colors because of inking issues and so on and so forth. That was the Joe Fixit retcon. That's how Marvel introduced him. They came back and they say, well, when Bruce Banner first turned into the Incredible Hulk, he actually turned into Joe Fixit, the Gray Hulk, and then eventually turned back into Banner. And then his second transformation was into the Green Hulk, and the one that we all know and love. So what this looks like here is it's a totally separate iteration of Gray Hulk outside of Joe Fixit. That's my interpretation, unless I'm missing something. And if I am, I'm sure you guys will be very quick to point that out. But this is dope. I'm actually really excited to see what the abilities of this current version of the Hulk are, because one of the other things that we saw in the mindscape of the Eldest, right, the mindscape of the Hulk, was that there are versions of the Hulk that we have not seen, that we've seen in the past, right? Titan Hulk or Infernal Hulk or something like that. So who knows what's going to happen? But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.